All right, I'm here with Kevin Longoria, the Chief Science Officer at Biostrap, which is a biometric wristband device that measures performance such as physical activity, arterial health, HRV, heart rate variability, sleep analysis, and vitals. Kevin, welcome to the show, brother.
Thanks, man. Pleasure to be here.
Yeah, I'm excited to get into things with you. I'm wearing, anybody watching on video, I'm wearing my Biostrap right now device. Kevin's got his too. Well, of course, we're rocking this. But I'm curious, just before we dive into all the fascinating things, and I'm really bullish on Biostrap with all my client stuff, but how'd you get started working for these guys?
Yeah, definitely. About 3 years ago now, I owned and operated a company out of Scottsdale, Arizona called Neuroforce One. So we were primarily validating nervous system-based models for specific diseases, primarily in the neuromuscular and neurodegenerative disease space. Ultimately took a bit of an athletic turn. I was the physiologist for some world champion MMA fighters, was on Joe Rogan. Some cool stuff came out of it. But ultimately throughout the process, we started to look at, what a lot of people are talking about. How do we expand our care beyond our facility walls? And, wearables are kind of a natural option there. And so at the time I had access to a multi-million-dollar laboratory, every piece of, gold standard reference equipment you'd ever want. So I decided basically let's source every wearable we can think of. FDA cleared, CE medical, the ones that no one's ever heard of, and basically did my own due diligence. I ran it through ECG testing and arterial blood gas testing and everything, and basically wanted to find the most reliable wearable device out there. Went through them all, and it's not about putting any competitors down, but as a clinician that was basically doing research and developing, pharmaceutical interventions and things like that, the integrity of the data is extremely important. And so at the time, I'd actually given up on the project. Like the wearable industry, it's promising, but it's not there yet. I was scrolling through, I think it was Facebook, something like that. Got a sponsored ad from a little company out of California called Biostrap. I hadn't even heard of the device. Saw what they were doing around cloud processing, some of the validation, and I'm cool, let's reignite it. Let's give it one more shot. As a data scientist, I studied the raw PPG, so the actual raw waveform data, and was just amazed, really better than I could have expected from a wearable device, especially one at the wrist. And so completely reignite the project. I dove in, looked at all the data, basically refined some of the algorithms with my team and everything. Company, Neuroforce is still going, but I knew I had to be part of Biostrap. And so about 2 years ago, I made the shift as the chief science officer, and now I dedicate my time solely on the clinical applications.
Wow, that's huge. Okay, so that's fascinating. You just mentioned something big that I wanted to ask you is like you just said, there's a lot of wearables out there. There's the Whoop, there's the Oura Ring, there's the Fitbit, big deal. So what makes Biostrap unique or different? And you mentioned that raw waveform. So maybe that's it.
Yeah, there's a few aspects. Number one is our use of red and infrared photoplethysmography, PPG. So we're starting to see some of the other wearables catch up to this, but historically they've been utilizing green light PPG. So red and infrared, while it's a little bit more expensive, it's what's going to be utilized in basically every pulse oximeter, every medical device out there. The major advantages there is tissue penetration. So we're able to penetrate much deeper. This allows us to basically measure things that others are forced to estimate, get basically cleaner waveform data. The other advantages is it's completely indiscriminate to things like skin tone, tattoos, arm hair, low perfusion levels. So we basically have one device that has been shown to collect clinically reliable data regardless of the population, right? So that's very important to us in terms of accessibility and such. Next, I would say comes down to our cloud processing. The market right now, primarily the consumer wearable market, does all local processing on the device itself. So collect raw data, calculate it on your device, get rid of all of that raw data, which we really value. And the purpose there is to improve processing speed, right? It's a real world instant gratification, right? So people like to see their active heart rate and what their respiratory rate is at the moment, but you lose a lot of data integrity when you do that. The way our architecture works is we collect raw data in its absolute rawest form, like XYZ Excel data that means nothing until it basically hits our cloud. This is where our pulse engine lives. And basically we go through a 26-step process where we do pre-processing, beat shape analysis, beat segmentation, not to get too nerdy on it at this point, but essentially we do 26 to 29 different confidence threshold tests for each individual pulse wave. So our pulse engine will say, this is a good data segment, process it. This is not a good data segment, throw it out. And so while this can lead to little gaps in your data, it's not fully continuous, not fully real time. Any data that does show up has been basically clinically validated for you. So it's extremely important, both for the consumer to know I'm changing my nutrition and the data is actually real that's showing my improvement. And it's even more important for a clinician when, say, we're coordinating care, right? False positives are the biggest risk for overburdening a physician. And so it comes down to how we collect data, how we process it, but really how we respect the importance of integrity.
Wow. And I'm just thinking too, like, and based on just everything you're saying, I would have said before talking to you, before getting on this interview, I would have said, yeah, okay, well, wearables, they're cool. Like, they give you some good data, but like, we still got a long way to go. Now, having just heard everything you said, do you still feel like, yeah, there's a long way to go? Or do you think like for the data that you guys are really getting out of Biostrap, out of this wearable, like it's pretty darn good. Like, yeah, nothing can be perfect, right? I mean, but like, this is pretty sharp stuff. Like, we're doing pretty good here.
We're doing really well, and I'll say better than most, but there's still a long way to go, right?
Yeah.
Today, still, it's collecting data, but what do you do with all of that data? That's the missing link, right?
Yeah.
So I'm showing you your heart rate variability, which is so sensitive to so many different factors, and your heart rate and your sleep and all of these types of things. So the idea is you have to put that into better context so that people can make actionable recommendations upon it. And I know we'll kind of circle back to it a little later in our conversation, but how do you actually develop a program based on this data? How does a doctor interpret a heart rate variability trend and know at this kind of threshold, it makes sense to start coordinating care? I'm no longer overburdening the healthcare system and wasting money by getting on a call and telling you to go to the emergency room. I'm actually saving it because I'm intervening prior to something more serious happening. So it's essentially the next step is to create specificity out of a lot of generally non-specific data, which is clinical workflows. This is really what I'm dedicated to as the next step.
Wow. So yeah, it almost kind of reminds me of like Levels Health, which is the continuous glucose monitor company. They don't make the glucose monitor, but they have the app. And it's like over time, they can get a lot of good data of like, in general, this is what we're seeing. And I'm assuming like the same thing for Biostrap. Like we can make some hypotheses based on like, if you go out of range and your HRV or heart rate or your SpO2, right? That was a big thing with the C word, the pandemic, right? We saw a lot of people were posting their Biostrap, the results, and we saw oxygen levels like SpO2, which is a really neat factor that Biostrap measures. And we can see these oxygen saturation levels dip when people got the C virus. And it was kind of like, oh, wow, there's no accident here. Like there was some pretty neat stuff. So I'm assuming that is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, that's a great segue into our early warning system. And so the idea that the power of longitudinal data is staying away from artificial binning, right? You're a healthy guy, but they'll tell you normal resting heart rate is 60 to 100 beats per minute. And if you're lower than that because you're well trained, we start to assign risk to that in the clinical medical field, even though we know it's because of good cardiorespiratory fitness.
Yeah.
So ultimately what we do is we do a baseline adjusted early warning system. So I know my resting heart rate is 49 plus or minus 1.2 beats per minute. So I've been collecting data for years, right? Yeah. And so anything that happens in there is totally normal. Anything beyond that, we start to assign a risk to on a continuous scale. And so we aggregate that for heart rate, respiratory rate, oxygen saturation, right? We're collecting 65 metrics. And so we actually then deliver that as an early warning system. We've calibrated one specifically for respiratory illness, including the C word there, but not specific to it. But basically we deliver that as a stoplight warning system. Red, high likelihood something abnormal is going on here. If you didn't party too hard last night, or you're not, at 2 miles high of altitude, there's probably something you want to look into. The yellow is the metaphorical, not gray area. You're not, quite there, but you're trending in the wrong direction. And green is you're good to go. And so essentially this is how you take data and you deliver it even to a consumer level stoplight warning system, right? I'm good to go today. Nothing to worry about. Red means, shit, maybe I need to look into it a little bit further. Yeah. So once again, creating specificity.
Very, very cool stuff. I'm just curious. This is just a selfish question. I've been dying to ask you. I have, and I've chronically had, like over the last 2 years of just measuring a lot of my data, and even with Biostrap, I've had like low HRV. It's like pretty low, like I think in the 30s or something. Not always that low. Sometimes it bounces back to like 60 or something. And that would be indicative of like I'm stressed out. I'm a busy health coach, entrepreneur, podcast, all these things. Maybe I'm not sleeping, I'm not eating properly, all these things. But it's like chronically low. And I gotta say, I feel great. I haven't been sick in like 2 or 3 years. Like I feel great. Is that just my baseline is low, or there's probably some things? And again, we don't know. This is just a generality. You don't know all my data, but I mean, do you see that in people? Like for some people, hey, it's just this guy's HRV, like his baseline is just in general low. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, HRV is extremely complex, right?
Okay.
So are we talking about RMS, SD, SDNN, LF to HF ratios, all these types of things? But ultimately, I truly believe in bio individualization, right? So if you are steady and your labs are fine and everything else is normal, that's absolutely your baseline. What I really care about, what I interpret in my clients, is what's called coefficient of variation. How much do you fluctuate day to day? So if you were 30 today, 50 tomorrow, 10 the following, then you have a major resilience problem. There's something going on at your nervous system where it can't handle whatever you're putting your body through.
Yeah.
So it's actually more a function of
coffee, too much coffee.
yeah, too much coffee. Yeah, exactly,
Yeah.
right. The HPA stuff plays a big role there. So absolutely.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's more about how much you vary day to day when it comes to the nervous system, as opposed to any absolute value. Medical field's always going to try and establish normal ranges, but they don't really talk about how much data that was trained on. And heart rate variability is still a relatively new metric, right? So we're still trying to figure out what a normal range is, or if there should even be one assigned to it.
Very interesting. Okay, cool. Yeah, because my heart rate, like you said, is typically pretty low, 50, 49. And so I'm like, I kind of use that. I try to like look at both of those to kind of get an idea. And then like you said, I'm looking at everything, the SpO2. Okay, how was that? My respiratory rate, like let's look at everything together, not just HRV as one metric. So kind of like with Biostrap, having that dashboard screen is kind of really nice to be able to kind of get all that data at once, right?
Yeah, and then putting into things like the recovery scores as well, which is like making sense of a lot of crazy data, but it's like, what is your physiologic readiness for adaptation? What's your risk of injury in a single 0 to 100? So goal is to not lose the integrity of the data through gamification, because some companies do that through certain scoring algorithms and such, but helping people make decisions based on that data as well.
Yeah. So how is the average person, like, where do you see most people using this for? You and I are nerding out here. We love the Biostrap, but like, where do you see like most people what are they using Biostrap for typically? Like, what's the biggest thing? Is it sleep? Is it, what are you seeing just across the board typically? And why should someone?
Yeah. I would say our major strength, like competitive advantages, is in sleep. And so extremely important, I would say, completely like under respected in clinical, athletic, everything in between. So we're really well positioned today for sleep. We're primarily being utilized in decentralized clinical trials. So COVID, escalated that as well. But the idea of collecting data remotely in a real world is very interesting, but there hasn't been a tool to do that reliably enough. The way I see everything moving is primarily through remote physiologic monitoring. So we want to empower the user with their data, get them more engaged with their health. The idea is that a trained professional is the one monitoring it, whether that be the fitness professional monitoring their client or the doctor monitoring their patient, because there's a steep learning curve. I do literature on this stuff all day, every day, and I still couldn't tell you exactly what heart rate variability measures, is affected by, right?
Yeah.
And so the idea is to provide the right data to the right people at the right time so that we can basically make decisions properly. That's ultimately where I see it moving, and we're seeing kind of that shift in maybe clinical medicine as well, telemed and RPM and everything.
Yeah, very, very neat. And you just mentioned something, so I'm just curious, like as a coach, as a health coach, like I would love to like offer this as part of just my coaching and some of the clients that I work with when it comes to weight loss, or I mean, let's just say like weight loss. I mean, are you seeing a lot of coaches in the industry like using with their clients, and is there a way that I can help support them through that? Or if I were to do that, do you guys assign somebody to? I'm just curious, how does that work?
Yeah, we do project management, and we kind of support you throughout that process. But there's different ways to engage with wearables in the fitness spectrum. Number one, if you're perhaps more engaged with the data and everything, it's about individualized data-driven program development. Right. So we establish a baseline phase. We understand deficiencies, strengths relative to a population or a competitive group. We develop interventions to target deficiencies, keep people good at what they're good at. And so now we're making, maybe nutritional recommendations based on deficiencies that we know can be targeted. And so there's that component. And then there's the actually quantifying our success, right? You and I like to make data-driven decisions, but we also know human physiology is extremely complex. How do we make sure it's working? We constantly check our work. We see, is it delivering the intended effect? Is it delivering some sort of maladaptive effect? Can I dynamically adjust this to avoid plateaus or keep people, moving in the right direction? And so it's great for the program development, ongoing monitoring. At a user level, that what I really love, what Biostrap is doing in wearables in general is, once again, the engagement side of things, right? Weight loss, absolutely. But, there's this misconception that I'm unhealthy because, or I'm overweight because I'm unhealthy. And really it's you're unhealthy, or sorry, you're unhealthy because you're overweight, when really you're overweight because you're unhealthy. You should be targeting your health, not your weight necessarily.
Yes.
And
I love
so
that you said that.
we develop the right programs, and sometimes that little number on the scale is not the best reinforcement, right? A lot of times when I'm starting a program, hydration number one. Well, water weighs something, right? And so it's not abnormal for you to gain a little weight before you start to lose it, or perhaps have a little Herx reaction if you're really toxic, right? And so sometimes you have to get through that phase. And so you need to keep people motivated. You need to show the progress throughout it. And so this is where data can really come in, right? Maybe your scale weight isn't moving quite yet, but look at your arterial health score, right? The stuff that really matters. This will show better directionality through lifestyle modification. And so you're able to basically look at the data, show them they are in fact improving, and keep them motivated in an ideal world.
Oh, okay. You hit on, you nailed it. I love that you said that, brother. It's not about the numbers on the scale always. It's about getting you healthy, and then the byproduct is weight loss. And yeah, that's so great. I've worked with so many clients too, where it's like maybe the pounds didn't shift, but they went from a size 7 to size 2. It's like, that's a win. Like we're getting too lost in the numbers, right? So very cool stuff. You mentioned heart health feature. Can you talk about that? And you kind of touched a little bit on the nutrition program. I'm just curious, like, how does this new heart health feature that you're talking about work? I think that's fascinating, that you guys can even measure arterial health. We know that like one of the biggest drivers of just inflammation and aging, and one of the top diseases out there is, what do we see? Diabetes, heart disease, high cholesterol, blood pressure, all those always in the top like 10, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you guys are doing some pretty neat stuff. Yeah. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, definitely. So get a little nerdy here for a sec, but essentially we take all of this raw data, we kind of reconstruct a waveform in the cloud to make it looks kind of like an EKG waveform people will be more familiar with than a PPG, but similar shape, but like a very pronounced morphology, or kind of curves to it, if you will. And so basically what we're leaning on a large study done a few years back by Takazawa. And essentially what they looked at is PPG morphology. You can basically interpret the shape of that beat and understand that it declines very predictably with age. And so by doing what's called second derivative waveform analysis, we can deduce your arterial and your peripheral elasticity. So when we're young, we're active, we're healthy, we tend to have very flexible, very supple arteries that are very, quick to respond to stressors, for example, like vasodilatory, responses and such. As we age, we make poor lifestyle choices, we're sedentary, our arteries tend to harden over time, right? Arterial stiffness. And so we can actually quantify a proxy for this through the actual PPG shape itself. And so we take arterial and peripheral elasticity, 2 measures of our heart health. We throw those on a 0 to 100 scale to basically show directionality. If you're drinking more water, you're exercising, you're following a proper nutrition program, in general, these will respond, positively to this type of intervention. It's still rather complex. And so what Takazawa did is basically transform that into an equivalent to arterial age. Because it predicts declines so predictably with age, they could basically do an assessment and say, here's your PPG waveform, you're 40, your arteries are testing at that of a 35-year-old or a 45-year-old, right? This is great for lifestyle, for motivation, progress tracking, and everything. We've done a lot of internal analysis, and we found flaws in that. I mean, we could basically tell you you're 35 plus or minus 12 years, but that's not great, right? Yeah. And so what we're focusing on right now is an arterial health score, and it basically throws you on a normal curve and basically says, relative to your population, what percentile of arterial health are you in? And we found this to be much more reliable and not as misleading as trying to assign call it biological age to your arteries based on a 2-minute assessment. And so that's pretty much the heart health. It's all about more complex measures from PPG that really reflect your risk of cardiovascular disease and these other types of metrics, which they're highly correlated with.
That's fascinating, because if you even just to put someone on some kind of nutritional program, or after 3 months, it'd be really interesting to see, or someone who's pre-diabetic and then they go through like a program with me or something that somebody else has, and then be able to quantify it and see it. Like, let's see the difference. Like that's cool stuff.
Yeah, a little tangential, but we did a study with the C word and actually found, I had a hypothesis, Brady-Kinnon hypothesis confirms it's more of like a vascular type of, manifestation and everything. And so it's like, well, we're measuring arterial health. Let's see what happens here. And I thought for sure, arterial elasticity would tank. And that might be one of the earlier, physiologic metrics that may precede respiratory rate and oxygen saturation dips and things like that. And I was completely wrong. It spiked very, very rapidly. It did precede all of these other physiologic metrics, but arterial elasticity was the first and most pronounced change that was approximately 1.7 days prior to symptom onset that happened every single time in every patient that we studied. And so it's like extremely, but that's where, once again, why would your arterial elasticity increase in response to respiratory illness? It's a stress response essentially.
Yeah.
So it's counterintuitive, but it's once again contextualizing the data, understanding that it's not always, higher is better type of thing. It's any rapid change is generally indicative of something going on.
Yeah, really neat. I wanted to ask you, because when we were talking about just some of how coaches can work with individuals and kind of use this tech, these biometrics and some of the data. Are you seeing a lot of professional athletes or like MMA fighters? You mentioned that's your old stomping ground. Like, do you see a lot of like trainers and folks using that with their athletes?
Yeah, definitely at the higher levels for sure. The problem that I see with what we try to do is just very individualized, right? So this doesn't always translate to team sports very well. Like, this small group of people had the wrong habits last evening. They slept like shit. They have poor recovery. And so we're going to give them the day off because of it. While I could justify, why that would be important to prevent injuries and such, it's generally not widely adopted yet. So not so much in team sports. What I did with my MMA athletes, I was, never managing more than 2 or 3 athletes at a time, full on, basically going to their house every morning to cook their food, cut it up for them and everything, like that level of care. This is where like you can really harness the power of the data. I think there's just still a lot of learning that needs to be done in the fitness industry, and that's primarily around the importance of sleep and recovery. Yeah. Right, the stressor phase, they're pretty damn good at applying that, right? When you rip your muscles apart, that's all the manly stuff. But understanding that the physiologic adaptations that we seek, hypertrophy and all of these types of things, occur during phases of sleep and recovery. So we should train to sleep and recover better as opposed to vice versa. But that's not the easiest pill for people to swallow that have been doing this for 20 plus years,
Yeah. Well, especially if you're fed, I think the fitness industry, we've been fed these ideas for so long. And so it's hard to break away from that. It's hard to break away what we think we know. So yeah. What about you guys have the Biostrap Labs, and you do a really great job, and I see it all the time. I get the emails, and you're working with a lot of like cool what I call like biohacking tech out there, like Brain Tap, which is a like binaural beat headset. I just interviewed Dr. Porter on my podcast a couple ago. Fascinating stuff. I just ordered one. I can't wait to see what that's gonna do. BioLight, which is like red light therapy, and then of course our good friends at Neufi with the Neufi, the electric stim device. But yeah, can you kind of just talk about like what Biostrap Labs is all about and like what you guys are doing there?
Yeah. So it's our contract research division. The goal here is primarily to provide a validation opportunities to maybe earlier stage companies that have a really amazing product, but maybe they can't afford a $500,000 university research study that'll take 2 to 3 years to get your results, right? And so we're trying to, one, help consumers make better decisions, because if you're looking at a shelf of 3 products and one of them has validation, you're making a better decision because there's actually a study to back up those claims. And then, on the other end of it, these companies need to understand how their products are actually working, the physiological effects that it's eliciting. And so in a nutshell, a company like, we'll take BioLight, for example, comes to us and they come with their hypothesis. And so we'll develop then a study protocol out of that. We have thousands of users that have basically opted in to perform these types of studies. They say, we're more than happy to give you our de-identified data for the last several years and ongoing, in exchange for, free BioLight for, an extended period or whatever like that. So recruitment is made extremely simple because we already have the user base and a very diverse user base. I can go in and I can say, I want users that are 25 to 34 years old that take more than 10,000 steps per day and sleep less than 7 hours. Like, I can get hyper defined on the population that you're trying to target. We develop, a baseline phase. So we want to understand where they're starting from. intervention phase, largely leaning on the product manufacturer to define usage criteria and things like that, and then a washout phase as well. And so the primary categories that we study there are product efficacy. Did it actually do what they say it's doing? If so, to what degree, right? What's kind of the effect size of the intervention there? We also look at, quote unquote safety. We primarily look at withdrawal effect. So even if it elicited an amazing response while you were using it, did you immediately return to baseline after you stopped or rebound to an even worse state? Like, are you developing some sort of reliance on the technology? Then we look at usability. This is generally provided back to the manufacturer. You told people to do it for 50 minutes twice a day. They're not doing that, man. So like, you need to refine what you're telling people to do. Although that might be the ideal protocol, if nobody does it, it's not really useful, right? And then last but not least is more of like a user satisfaction feedback type of thing as well. So we conduct, everything from recruitment, protocol development, analysis, publication for a very low cost, and give them basically a market differentiator while, helping consumers understand what these products are actually doing.
That is so neat. I mean, and I don't want to put you on the spot here, but I'm just curious, was there any tech or any gear that came through Biostrap Labs that after you saw the data and the results that you were like, oh, I got to get me one of these, or just like, you know what? Like that's hard to ignore. Like that is some good stuff. That's some good tech right there.
Yeah. Most of them that you've seen, I'd say we're very selective of who we choose. If they're making crazy claims, we usually won't even take their money because we know we won't prove it. Yeah. And that's not the name of the game to disprove. It's to basically prove those that we really believe in. Yeah. I would say out of them, I've always been a big fan of what they're doing over at Neufi and everything. Yeah. So huge believer there. Pretty amazing results that we saw. Out of all of them, that I would say surprised me the most was probably the soft shell hyperbaric chambers that we've evaluated. Oh, okay. So yeah, we haven't published that one quite yet, but essentially, really good research around specific conditions and all of these types of things. But in terms of just general athletic recovery and such, I was pretty amazed in terms of the changes in heart rate variability and some other factors. The most recent one I would say blew my mind as well, and that's higher dose, the sauna blanket.
Okay.
Yeah. And so 50 minutes prior to bed, they basically ask you to zip up in kind of a sleeping bag type of contraption. It's infrared and sauna basically. And so I understand physiology, what happens to you during that session. And so I was maybe a little skeptical about your sleep immediately following. These results are soon to be published. I won't get too ahead of myself, but pretty drastic decreases in nocturnal resting heart rate following the session, huge increase in heart rate variability, a shift towards parasympathetic recovery, like the LF to HF ratios. So, stay tuned for that publication, but it was one that I thought they were maybe marketing a little boldly, and the proof held up. It was very impressive.
Wow, that's fascinating. Okay, I got to check that out. I have a TheraSage sauna that I really like, and I remember this is just one time, I did a sauna session later in the day, and it wasn't 50 minutes before bed, but when I was tracking my HRV and everything through Biostrap, I was a little restless that night, which I was surprised. I thought it was actually going to would help me. And so I've shifted all my sauna work to the front end of the day, but that's interesting. I'm gonna have to try that again and just kind of get a better baseline and see what changes occur. That's really interesting to know.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. You mentioned Neufit. I am a Neufit practitioner, and I love the newbie and stuff. I just want to talk about that briefly, and you can kind of maybe tell the good folks kind of what you guys were looking for and what were you looking to prove, right? I just want to tell everybody what I did recently is I woke up with one of those trashed HRV scores. I want to say it was like a 38 or something crazy, right? And so I was like, I'm going to throw on there's a device, it's an electric stim device using a DC current. And there's a technique we use. It's called a master reset, and it helps put the body in a parasympathetic state and puts the nervous system in this parasympathetic state, which we know is that's the only way the body can actually heal. So anyways, I did it for about 20 minutes. I put the electrodes on the back of my neck and then the electrodes on my feet, and I ran current for like 20 minutes. When I took it off and I did my Biostrap measurements, my HRV shot up to 80. I think it was 80. It was incredible. I was like, whoa, I was not expecting that. I thought it was just going to jump up a little bit, but it like doubled. So, I don't know what you guys actually did. I'm curious, like, what were you guys looking to measure? Was it HRV or or just
Yeah, we always go in with the hypothesis, but we actually, collect 65 plus metrics. So we look at all of them, right? And so with this specifically, we were targeting patients with musculoskeletal pain above a certain threshold. I believe, the 7 out of 10 or something like that. Primarily looking at the acute effects. So we would do a quick, 5-minute report immediately before and after their session. I don't believe it was the master reset. It's been, about a year since we did this study. So we looked at the acute effects, and to confirm what you said, immediate, very drastic increases in things like heart rate variability, a shift towards, higher frequency bandwidths and such. So we knew there was an immediate effect, and that's, you feel it, it's kind of obvious there. What we also saw was pretty profound improvements in sleep quality, which is very important. Tangential, but the bidirectional relationship between sleep and pain, we're actually seeing that poor sleep is a better predictor of pain than vice versa. So major thing in pain should be treating sleep, right? And so we found amazing improvements in sleep latency, how long it was taking somebody to fall asleep, sleep efficiency, which is primarily latency plus number and duration of awakenings, and significantly greater deep sleep. And this is, when growth hormones produce, and we're basically repairing a lot of the physiologic damage and everything. And so everything, basically leaned towards it being a pretty amazing tool for recovery and pain and all of these things. Confirms what we already know, right? But it's always good to have the data. We found, small shortcomings in the study, such as we probably should have spread the intervention phase out a little bit longer. I think we did 8 sessions over 30 days. And, a lot of other things like arterial elasticity and the arterial health score were trending towards statistical significance, but they didn't quite get there. And so we've always, shout out to Garrett and Ramona, by the way. We've always talked about, doing a follow-up bigger study with a bigger population and everything as well. But what we found was, just amazing preliminary data.
That's fascinating. I really love too, Kevin, like just the, you can tell just like listening to you talk, like the care and all the metrics, and you're very careful at, you're not just trying to pump up these companies. Like you guys really like do a great job of like measuring everything and ruling things out. And even like you said at the end, like, hey, there were some things we could have done better. Like I love the transparency and just how thoughtful you guys are about your studies. It's really nice.
Thanks, man. No, I do appreciate that. And it's, it's adhering to the scientific method. And we actually make everybody sign a contract before we'll take their money and say, we're not guaranteeing you results. We don't necessarily publish the bad results. That is, a little outside of the scientific method. But if something just absolutely sucks and doesn't work, we don't necessarily go tell the world about that. So there's been a handful of those that I wish I could say, don't spend your money on that. But, we do try and balance out the business and the science a little bit, but we're never going to make a claim that hasn't been validated.
Yeah, very cool. And that's great. That people know if they're a consumer of Biostrap, they know what they're getting, that this is a solid company and good foundation. So I love that. Any other upcoming, or I know you mentioned higher dose, but any other upcoming Biostrap lab studies that you guys are looking at, or anything else you can share that's, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, so a few things that are I am really happy about that we're working on right now. Wrote a grant, got picked up by the National Institute of Minority Health and Health Disparities. So we're doing this very large study, primarily in kind of communities with diminished access to healthcare. And so we're really testing out Biostrap's like usability, wear, also some health biometrics and everything in these communities. And to me, this is so awesome, because this to me is what wearable technology, like its best home in our society, is to provide data to people that may not otherwise have access to data, right? And so digital technology is supposed to improve accessibility, cost of care, efficiency, outcomes, all these things. And I can argue it's done very little of that. So this to me was a big step towards improving accessibility for such a large organization to say, best value analysis and most advantageous to the government when they compare to every single technology you can think of. Like, that's when I definitely, put a feather on the cap for. I'm really pleased with that one. Probably a more sexy one that people care about more is we're working on career astronaut training. And so we all know the commercial space industry is taking off, right? And so they have plans to have millions of people on space, and no longer is it all these rocket scientists that are going to be going to space, but ultimately, we need everybody. We need manual laborers and things like that. And so there's this initiative, I can't really talk about the company, but doing research in 128 countries right now, people that want to be a career astronaut. So we're studying their habits, their sleep patterns, how they perform on various different, physical tests, and sending them to, the depths of the ocean for scuba diving missions and the top of the Himalayas for, crazy missions of low oxygen. And, we're really trying to understand, how do you like digitally phenotype these people that are not going to crumble under the stresses of space, and all these types of things. Ultimately working towards, idealistic that we would actually be utilized in space. And so you track changes in oxygen saturation, arterial health that no one really knows yet, right? What happens in these microgravity environments? We know your heart shrinks, but what does that do, right? And so, it's probably, once again, more the sexy work that'll be really exciting 20 years from right now, but it's not the not the immediate gratification type of study either.
Yeah. Yeah. Very neat. One last thing I wanted to ask you is, because we touched on a lot on sleep, and I love that you mentioned that. I didn't even really go that deep into it. I just kind of glossed over, like, yeah, sleep, but it is, it's like one of the most important things. And it was just fascinating listening to you say, like, yeah, if we could dial that in for you, you'd have so many good, better health results. There's something with Biostrap that you guys do. You have a sleep lab, which is actually different than just that. Like, I can get normal sleep data from you guys every night, but then there's also a sleep lab. Can you just kind of touch on like what the difference and what people can expect and why they may want to join the Sleep Labs program?
Yeah, absolutely. So when we increase the frequency of biometric collection, so we go from every 5 minutes or 10 minutes to every 2 minutes. And so say you have sleep apnea, right? We need to be a little bit more precise on your hypoxic events. We also give you the contributing factors to your sleep score, so you can better understand how different habits are specifically affecting your sleep, which is really important. One of our more recent improvements to that as well is the addition of a circadian interventions. So this requires a minimum 15 days of sleep. For most people, it's going to be about 20 to 25. But basically, over that time period, we understand what's your ideal circadian, your chronobiology, like what time should you actually go to sleep? What time should you wake up? How much time should you spend in bed, which is different than the amount of time of sleep, right? So after, call it 20 days or so, we start to give you your ideal circadian rhythm. We tell you exactly how much you need to be sleeping as a function of optimal biometrics, recovery, health, everything. Then, to hold you accountable, we do sleep accounting, which is basically your sleep bank, right? And so if we tell you to sleep 7 hours and you sleep 6, we give you 1 hour of debt. And so the research supports a basically 3-day trailing. If you go more than 2 hours of sleep debt, this is generally where you start to have, impediments in your central nervous system and balance and, reaction time and these types of things. And so you never want to go greater than 2 hours of sleep debt, but you also don't want to go over 2 hours of sleep excess, because we're actually pinpointing your precise sleep needs. And so to me, a big part of that is, once again, getting away from all these normal ranges. National Sleep Foundation, one of my favorite foundations out there, but it's still 7 to 9 hours, right? And that's a big variance, if you ask me. Right? Most people struggle to get 7. And so to remove some of that ambiguity and really show you how much sleep you actually need, as well as the ideal schedule. This to me is one of my, what I call the low-hanging fruit interventions. It costs you absolutely nothing, but it's one of the most impactful things you can do to your health, is just start to follow that circadian rhythm.
I couldn't agree more. And I'm currently doing the sleep lab. So I'm excited to kind of see what that looks like. I always, and Michael Bruce, the Power of Win, he talks about these chronobiologies and different chronotypes. And so this is very helpful though, for people to like really dial it in. I always go back and forth. Like, is there really these chronotypes? Or I always think about like Ayurvedic principles and just like, no, when the sun goes down, you need to go to bed. Like, so it'll be really interesting to see. And what I'm thinking about how, cause I used to be a first responder, I did that for 14 years. And as you know, first responders, we do a lot of shift work. And so I'm thinking, man, this would be really neat to see for them. I mean, that'd be huge, very impactful, I think.
Yeah, I actually proposed a large study to a major health system that I won't name, but basically tried to make the case, let's study the shift work, because there's all these problems with burnout and the great exit and everything right now. Healthcare, they're getting overworked, right? They're leaving their jobs. And so like, what if we could work towards, instead of these 12-hour shifts that flip-flop every other day, a little bit more consistency in the schedule and such. And it was too disruptive. They said, even if we prove it, we can't implement it. So why are we going to tell people what's wrong with them? And so that's a lot of resistance that unfortunately we see. It's like pitching to a MLB baseball team, like, let's study how 170 games per year and all the constant travel, the effect that you're having on people's longevity and their health. And they're like, why the hell would we do that? And so, like, unless you're actually willing to change, sometimes they don't want to do the research.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, great stuff. I want to jump into some lightning round questions, but I'm curious, anything that I didn't ask you that you wish I had?
No, I think that was pretty thorough. I appreciate it.
I appreciate you, man. This was great. Seriously, I'm just blown away by the tech, and it makes me want to like use it more, because sometimes I'll take my strap off. I use it a lot of times to track certain workouts and then sleep, and then I'll forget. And now I'm just like, oh, I can't wait to like be really consistent with it. So, thank you. All right, you ready?
Let's do it.
All right. If the old you could see the new you, what would the new you say?
I guess, the risks will pay off essentially. I ultimately was planning on going to medical school, got through the MCATs, finally got accepted and decided to enter the entrepreneurial world. And it was a big risk. And I, frankly, always planned on circling back. And I'm going to be honest, I don't plan on circling back now. And I'm so glad I did. And I feel like I can do a lot of good in the role I'm in today.
I love that, man. That's amazing. Thank you. Maybe this ties into it. My next question is going to be, what are some choices that you made that you think made you who you are today?
A major kind of inflection point for me was actually I was going to be a psychiatrist was kind of the plan there. And so I was, volunteering a lot, looking behavioral health homes, psychotropics, SSRIs, and then all this amazing research started to come out about microbiome-based approaches and basically blowing away everything that we had ever done, learned, and everything in my training. And so that to me was like one of the biggest things that changed. Like there's just a better way. And so that's kind of, one of the things that changed for me.
Yeah. I'm just curious. Have you guys done anything with plant medicine, or is that on the rise? Do you plan on doing any studies, or has anybody asked you? It's just amazing. I talked to so many, not even just biohackers, because I hate to like throw it at that, people that just like want to hack, but just some like really, there's some really just amazing thought leaders out there that have really credited plant medicine to really helping them out. I know that's maybe controversial, but I don't know. I'm just wondering, has that been broached for Biostrap at all?
No one's come to us yet. I think Biostrap Labs is meant to study the controversial products, right? Like, let's put it to the test, right? Add some proof to it. So no, not yet. But if anyone's listening and is interested, I'll take that on all day. Where a lot of universities may not want to back a product if it's not Western medicine per se. I'm all for it. If it works, I'll be the first one on the podcast to talk about it.
Yeah. You know what? On that note too, you just mentioned like, were there any supplements or anything do supplement companies come to you guys a lot as well? And are you able to quantify anything from that? Like, I don't know. I'm just thinking like melatonin or something, or I don't know, magnesium product.
We're actually doing one with a major magnesium provider right now. So just in the baseline phase, nothing to talk about on that one quite yet. No other major supplements. I'm really interested in. I actually wanted to do like a large scale head-to-head on CBD products and everything. Kind of see whose is bullshit and whose is actually working. So I'm a big believer, but I've also tested a few dozen that didn't do anything. So I'd love to really do more of a head-to-head on some of these products as well.
Awesome. You guys are such a force in the wellness world. I'm just curious, is there anybody that, someone that inspires you in that health and wellness world, or maybe it doesn't have to be the health and wellness world, but yeah, anybody that you follow or inspires you?
I don't really do much outside of the research world. I'm a big fan of Dr. Shauna Halson over at Australian Catholic University, doing some really amazing sleep research. A colleague friend, Dr. Ali Nasser over at UCLA Medicine. He's the director of structural and interventional cardiology. Always learn something every time I talk to him. Beyond that, maybe not like the big names that people are used to. I'd say one of my claim to fame is on the Joe Rogan podcast, I sat in the same chair as Elon Musk exactly 1 week after. So I thought that was pretty cool. But other than that,
you were trying to like make sure like maybe like some of his dead skin or something came out. You're like, I'm in the same, this is the same world, that he sat in. That's cool.
Yeah.
Okay, this is gonna be a good one then for you. Any books? Obviously you're a voracious reader, and maybe it's just research and papers, but any books that I'm a big reader. Did any books that had like a tremendous impact on your life, or just that you would recommend someone go out and read?
To be honest, it's been a long time since I actually read a book. I am so overwhelmed with research and everything, so I could name dozens of white papers and meta-analyses and things like that. But it's been a long time. That actually sounds pretty refreshing. So I just had another baby 2 months ago, so I'll have to plan that a few months out. But no, unfortunately not. If you have any recommendations, I'd love to.
What am I reading right now? I'm always reading like three or four different books. Not because I'm like super smart. I just like to kind of go back and forth between them all. So I'm reading David Perlmutter's new book, Uric Acid. That one's pretty fascinating, which might tie in with some stuff that Biostrap's doing. But yeah, I'll have to think of some other ones.
Garrett sent me a copy of his book and signed it, and I'm gonna tell you, Garrett, I haven't read it yet. I'm sorry.
You know what? The thing about Garrett's book, it's amazing, but you probably almost by working with him, like the book.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Any last couple questions, we'll wrap it up. Any rituals or hacks or like practices or anything that you do on a regular basis? Some people do gratitude journaling or stuff like that, but what about you? Anything?
First thing I do each and every day is I go for a long run. I don't have much time to myself anymore, so I go do a nice outdoor run about 3 to 5 miles every morning at 4:30 a.m. And that's my time to me where I reset my mind. Love the family, got to get away from them a little bit. And so that to me, I've realized that the days I do that versus the days I don't, from mood to mental clarity to energy levels, night and day difference. Big thing, get some catharsis out first thing in the morning for sure. I do quite a bit of grounding, not quite as much as I used to anymore, but I definitely like to feel my surroundings. So take the shoes off, go walk in the backyard in some grass for a little bit. And then beyond that, I'm just, really strict on my nutrition, but I wouldn't call that necessarily a ritual, as just much as, I know what I should and should not put in my body, and I try to be conscious of what I am.
I love that. It's one of your higher values, and that's what.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's beautiful. Oh man, Kevin, last but not least, like where can people find you and the good folks at Biostrap?
Yeah, we actually just launched a new website, biostrap.com. We're on Instagram, Facebook, pretty much everything. I don't lead that department, but I believe it's all just at Biostrap. So check us out there. If anybody wants to reach out to me, Kevin at biostrap.com, more than happy to answer any questions you may have. Keep your eye out for some really exciting stuff to come. We're a little early to drip it, but in the next few months, we're gonna have some amazing news to share.
Awesome stuff. Thanks, brother. Appreciate you.
Cool. Thanks, Joel.